Welcome to Feminine Roadmap Podcast. I'm your host, Gina Farrar. Each week, I bring you an inspiring conversation to help you navigate the challenges and changes of midlife so that you can not only survive, but thrive in your second half. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. It is Gina here, and today we're going to be talking about success. How you can be successful and healthy no matter where you start, no matter where you're at, no matter where you're from, or what has happened to you. And to have this conversation with me, my guest, Kim Cobb, is a business professional. She runs a private investment firm, and she is the author of Stuck, A Way Out. Kim is going to be sharing her story about being one of the first children on a milk carton as a missing child. So without further ado, I would like to welcome you, Kim, to the show. And thank you so much for saying yes to me.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. So why don't we jump right in? Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what led to this mission and message? Give us your story and what led you to write this book.
Well, sure. I'd love to. So I tell people all the time, they see me today and they see a put together, polished, successful professional person. And people would assume that I had opportunities in life and, that they don't have if they're in a set of circumstances that are not ideal. So I've always used my story to explain to people that it doesn't matter where you started out in life, where you find yourself now, the mistakes that you've made. You can still go on to be healthy, happy, and successful and do something with yourself. I have a tough love message that basically says there's no excuses for not accomplishing something that will have value to the rest of the world and for healing yourself from what has happened to you. I don't know anyone who started out behind the starting line in life, further back than what I did. I was the product of an extremely dysfunctional family where things had kind of been snowballing for generations on both sides of my family. And my parents went through a bitter divorce. And what happened was on a routine visitation weekend, my dad decided to snatch my brother and I. And he woke us up in the middle of the night, asked us if we wanted to live with him, and packed us up in the car with just a couple of changes of clothes. And he drove away into the night. My mother, despite using all of the resources available to her at the time, was never able to locate us. She utilized the FBI. We became official FBI missing persons. We were listed with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, as well as other tools that parents use to try to locate their children. Our pictures were on posters in post offices and department stores, such as Walmart. We were featured on radio and television news stations, anything that could be utilized to find us. Now, this was the days before the internet, so it was much easier to be successful if you wanted to disappear. And my dad was successful in disappearing with us. He changed our identities and we lived as fugitives on the road for many, many years. I didn't see my mother again until I was 18 years old. We lived at times homeless, in and out of homelessness. Sometimes we had a house. Sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we lived out the back of our van. Sometimes we lived in campgrounds inside tents. It just depended on what the situation was and what he was able to do for cash at the time. So I grew up in a home with him that was very much a victim-like culture, where our life and the fact that we had to live the way that we did was blamed on my mother. My brother and I were told many, many untruths about her and what had happened and why we were having to do this. So he spun a web of lies for us and therefore got our support. When the veil was really lifted for me, I was about 15 years old, and I had hopes and dreams just like any other young person that age. And he told me that I wasn't going to be able to go to college. And that really threw me for a loop and hurt me, because I realized at that time that what had happened had been about revenge, him seeking revenge against her. He did not have our best intentions at heart as his children. And he didn't think I could go to college without assuming my birth identity, which would lead her to me, which he felt like would lead her to him, and he would have to pay the consequences for what he had done. So my eyes were suddenly opened to the reality of the situation, and that he was never going to let us leave and have our own life. So I started slowly and methodically making plans on how I was going to take control of my own life, my own development, and my own future. And I planned it out. I did have some help, but I ran away and really took about a year and a half or so to kind of get my head on straight, got some counseling and things like that. And then I was reunited with my mother when I was 18 years old. I really thought at the time that, I had overcome the past and the circumstances and what had happened to me just because I had moved on and put it behind me. So life was great. I was on cloud nine. I had to drop out of high school whenever I ran away. So I took my GED. I started college, started working on my degree, and I was accomplishing everything that I had said I wanted to do, to be a normal person my age. But what I hadn't done was really get my hands around, what had happened, what sort of unhealthy dysfunctions were in our family that had led to the culmination of these events, and how they had really emotionally affected me. So we lived so far outside of normal society. I wasn't really equipped with the tools to deal with normal relationships. So right away, I got involved in a relationship that was with a young man that was extremely unhealthy. So really what I did was jump from one set of controlling circumstances and one controlling environment into another one. And it eventually became physically abusive. It was emotionally abusive. And over time, this person held me back to the point that I literally described a life that had just bombed out on me. And I believed that things couldn't be any better and that I didn't deserve any better. I quit college. I got a job at a grocery store. And I allowed him to perpetuate his belief on me that I would never amount to anything. And I lived this way for about 6 years before eventually I realized that I was worth it and that I had just jumped out of the frying pan and into the fire. And if this was the way that I was going to live, then everything that I had sacrificed to get to where I was at the point, which wasn't very far along, but all the pain that I'd gone through would have been not worth it. So I decided that I was going to turn all of that into something. So I exited the relationship. I got involved in some church groups that helped with the particular mental issues and emotional issues that I was dealing with, and got some real specific direct help to really dig deep and discover what was going on with me, because my primary goal was to prevent myself from making these mistakes over and over and over again in my life. I really, really wanted to truly overcome the dysfunction in our family. So I went back to school. By this time I was in my 20s. I went back to school and one class at a time started working on my business degree. It took me 11 years, but I eventually finished my degree. I was able to have a healthy marriage and have a family, but I wasn't in a rush to do anything. I let things happen naturally and used the things that I was learning, and refused after that point to settle for less. So my book, Stuck, really is about the things in life that I found that we're truly in control of. And it is rather tough love and blunt, but in a loving way, because I really care about my readers getting what I have to say. I think that victims are a negative product of an unfortunate situation, but I don't think that you have to remain a victim. You can be, past tense victim. I was a victim, but I am no longer a victim. I just decided that I was going to be a product, but I made the conscious decision not to be a negative one of my circumstances any longer. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I like to make sure that people walk away with after reading my book, Stuck, is that it might not be your fault that you find yourself in the set of circumstances that you're in or where you are, but it is your fault if you allow yourself to remain there. And today can be rock bottom. Tomorrow you can put your foot on the first rung of that ladder climbing out of this pit. So really my message is just about, if you want to move forward in life, I teach you the tools in the book, how to take control and start taking those steps. And this is, while my story is very dramatic, the message and the tools that I preach and teach are very practical, very sensible. Anyone can get something out of, what I have to say, whether you're stuck in a career that's dead end and you want to change, if you're just in a rut in life, if you are in a bad relationship and you need to get out of it, or something such as what I went through. This is not rocket science, what I have to say. It's just very, very practical steps about how to take control of your own circumstances, stop leaving that power in the hands of others, and start using it to move forward to, towards the destiny that and the life that God intended for you to have. I don't think we were intended to be down, miserable, unhappy, and complacent.
Awesome. Absolutely. I 150% agree with that. So let's talk a little bit about some of these strategies. If somebody has that feeling of stuckness, they really don't see a way out. Why don't you share with me a couple of ways you help people get unstuck?
Well, the first thing is this is a mental process, definitely. Before it's a physical process, it's a mental process. And if we will go through the mental steps, then the physical steps become technicalities, okay? So the first thing is, I think that you have to believe that you're worth it. You have to believe that you deserve something better than what you have now. If not, you won't be willing to do anything about it. So that's step number one. And another thing is that a lot of people might believe that they deserve better, but they don't believe that it's possible. So we have to eliminate negative self-talk from our minds and stop telling ourselves that we can't. We can't blame the others for, our life's missed expectations. And, there's nothing that'll keep you stuck longer than playing that victim game. And being stuck somewhere that you don't belong is a very, very painful place to be. So you have to be willing. You have to understand that you're the most important and valuable asset that you possess, and then start allowing yourself to envision what you think your destined life looks like. So I had a simple formula that I came up with for myself for my transition from sort of down in the pit victim-like mentality to getting myself on the road to success and recovery. But I say that me today, plus the people that I surrounded myself with, plus the new things that I learned, was going to equal the future me. So you today, plus the people you surround yourself with, plus the new things you learn, will equal the future you. And that's a pretty simple way to look at it.
It's interesting because I feel like people can be stuck from comfort. Like your situation was obviously dramatic. You were a victim in a situation. And so when you talk to people about their stuckness, how do you draw out their awareness of the stuckness, or what it is exactly that makes them stuck? Because I think people can actually get comfortable with stuckness and maybe not even see it.
So one of the things that I advise people to do is to journal and allow their minds to go back in time to a place where they, even if it's to when you're a child, what kind of things did you dream about doing? What did you want to be when you grow up? When there were no barriers, there were no financial barriers, there were no physical barriers, there were no relational barriers, but it doesn't cost anything to just allow your mind to wander. And there are some steps in my book with journaling that are really, really important that help you get connected with those things. I kept a journal for 12 years, and looking back is whenever I realized that when I would sit and journal and just be honest with myself about what I was really thinking, then I could get over, it was so enlightening because I could get over some of those hurdles. And I was putting those nuggets and those kernels down on paper. And it was really, really important in my recovery process to do that. Another thing is that finding a mentor, finding someone you can talk to who perhaps has been through something similar to what you have, if not just some adversity, and finding someone that you can trust to be authentic with. But it is really, really hard to overcome something if you can't find someone to share what you're going through with. So there's a mentality I come across very often where people are embarrassed to share what's going on or what's happened to them, because they don't want, the outward persona to be seen as false or fictitious. But being authentic, having someone that you can talk to about what is going on and what you're thinking about, who can become a spiritual or, professional or emotional mentor to you is really important in order to help to open your eyes to, that you might be stuck. You have to be willing to shift your thought process, and take the responsibility to do this work. And it's hard, but people mentally, you are capable of overcoming whatever adversity that you find yourself in. Things might not look the same on the other side of the storm, but, where there's faith and hope and resilience, beauty can be brought from the ashes of where you are.
Things might not look the same on the other side of the storm. That is something that I've had people say, it's scary to change because at least you know what to expect on this side, right? You have that knowledge of what this is, but one of the questions that I like people to ask themselves is, is this behavior, is this process that I'm going through right now, is this still serving me? Because I'm sure you as a child, Kim, there were things that you developed to help yourself cope with the stresses and the trauma that you were actually going through. Not that you would have known it was traumatic necessarily, but you probably
Right.
developed emotional and mental ways of coping, right?
Yes.
So we do learn ways of coping. And at some point in life, those things sometimes no longer serve us. Would you agree?
Definitely. I would definitely agree. I think that what worked in the past may not work in the future. And this continuous improvement process that I focus a lot on in the book says that, right there. It's very easy to become complacent out of fear, to support what you were saying. I got to the point where I just knew that I deserved more, and I had to, I mentally, my attitude became one to where I was willing to claw my way out of that. And I knew that if life was ever going to look better, then I had to do something about it. And I stopped letting other people, hold me back. And one of the things that I realized was that, a ship cannot sail if its sails aren't up. It's physically impossible. So I just think that it's just too costly to leave your life to circumstance and not think about what you want, and to make a conscious effort with some of these steps to move toward the life that you deserve. And I think that the whole point for me of transforming myself beyond my circumstances, it's in hindsight that I can see the cycle that I have been through. But I'm now someone who not only have I overcome that, I've got something to teach other people. And so this is what my legacy is. I can pay this back, and someone else can pay it, then pay it back. And it will just go on and on and on. And it's a cycle of life that won't ever end. I just think that key to getting unstuck is this lifelong learning and continuous improvement. And you have to be willing to change the way you think. And that creates a domino effect. Changing the way you think changes the way you see things. Changing the way you see things is going to then change the way that you feel. Changing the way you feel is going to change the way you act and what you act on. And then, changing the way you act and what you act on changes your life. And that's the cycle that produces continuous change and growth, in an overall person's life. It sets things in motion, keeps them in motion. I think that winning people know how much they still have to learn, even when they're considered experts by others, and even when they're scared. Fear's a liar, and we've used that word a couple of times, but fear is a liar, and that is one thing that I would say, circling back to, if you're stuck and you're just afraid to change because you don't know what the future looks like, fear is a liar, plain and simple, and it is a mental block that I do think holds a lot of people back, and we all struggle with it.
It's interesting when you talk about fear, because so often the things that we fear is, you've heard that acronym, false evidence appearing real,
Yes.
right?
It's usually not as bad as what we envision if we just
Exactly.
face it.
We should all be creating movies with the stuff that we come up with in our heads, right? The script up there is pretty dramatic sometimes.
Yes.
But, you talked about having to be willing to shift your thought process. Mindset is such a big part of what we do and who we are. And people don't realize that our thoughts really are directing our lives. And you shared that process. You were talking about, what you think affects what you say, what you do, and the outcomes that you have, right?
Right.
So how does someone begin to identify their own thoughts? Because we have had these things in place since we were children, and we don't always hear ourselves. There are some people they don't hear themselves. Like, for example, when I'm coaching someone, instead of bringing it up, I do typed notes. I'll type out word for word what they say verbatim. And then I send them the notes. And 100% of the time, they're like, where did you get that? I'm like, you said that. And they didn't even know they were saying it. Like, that belief was just so strong, but they had no idea. And they might say it 3 or 4 different ways. So what strategies do you use? That's one that I use. I let them say it and then I repeat it back. So what strategies do you use to help people really identify these mindsets or these beliefs that they're living under?
So what you do with your clients that you coach is similar to what I ask people to do in the book. And in one of the journaling exercises is to no holds barred, sit down and make a list of every negative thought that you have about yourself, and every negative thought. And at the top of later on in the process, I have people write at the top of the page, lies, in all capital letters, lies. And because if you see it on paper, what is going through your mind, we forget what we thought about unless we document it somehow. But if we document what we're thinking in some way, you could do voice recordings if it was your media method. But to get it physically out so that it's tangible, so that you can see or hear it and call your own bluff, so to speak. but that's just simple. I mean, it's just simple. But the journaling and asking yourself deep questions and writing the answers down or typing the answers, in a computer or notes on your phone or whatever, so that you could go back later and really read back over what is really going on in your head is really, really important. And so here's the thing. It sounds so simple, but knowledge is power. So we have to get to know ourselves really, really well if we're going to fix things. If you're in a bad relationship, you can leave that relationship. But if you don't know why you got into a relationship in the first place, you're just going to get into another bad relationship. So digging deep and learning yourself so that you know how things are going to affect you is very important. And there's some simple tools, such as the journaling exercises that have worked for me.
And you'd mentioned being honest with yourself. So I'm imagining, as you're talking about doing this journaling exercise, that people may want to edit as the thoughts come up and not put them out on the paper. Like, what do you call it? Minimizing the thought. Whereas what I hear you saying is any thought that comes up, the honest piece is writing it down.
Yes. And people are scared that someone else is going to read it, but we have to find a way so that we can be honest with ourselves and use these tools to overcome. I mean, this is the negative thoughts about yourself is the number one. Eliminating negative self-talk is the number one thing that I think you have to begin with in order to move forward. Nothing's powerful enough to hold you back if unless you allow it to, but you have to identify these things and get in tune with yourself. It's a difficult thing to do, but getting to know yourself is the most enlightening thing that can happen.
I would have to say that getting to know yourself through your own eyes is probably what I would think would be an accurate way of putting it, because sometimes the self that we see is the self we've been told. Like you said, the marriage that you were in, your first marriage or your first relationship, was you were being told who you were and what you were worth. And you chose to come into agreement with that. And that's something I talk a lot about, is what are you making agreement with? And sometimes I think people, and maybe you can confirm this, they need to figure out how to even know themselves, because they've lived so many years with the idea of who they are based on what their parents told them, what their teachers told them, what their coaches told them, maybe their partner told them. So maybe for some people, it's really even meeting themselves for the first time on their own ground.
Yes. And, identifying what you're thinking about and getting it down into a tangible form so that you can see it is one of the other reasons that it's important, is because one of the things that I say is that your thoughts are one of the things that you're in control of. So if that's the biggest thing that's holding you back, finding a way to corral that so that you can, get it under control is really super important. And if you can then take those thoughts about yourself and try to dig deep and try to figure out, where did that come from? Go back in time and try to discover through self-discovery, where did that come from? What situation, what person made you believe that? And, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth. And so if there's someone who is telling you something about yourself that is holding you back and keeping you down, you have to find a way to separate yourself from allowing that to creep in. And because we're starting a process, a road to recovery here, so you have to eliminate those unhealthy things. Your mind, to me, is like a room with this old wallpaper on it. And you've got to strip all that old wallpaper off. And the wallpaper represents thoughts, fears, anxieties, past hurts. You've got to strip it all off and have a clean slate, and then start replacing it with positive truths.
That's a really good point. It's not just a process of removal. Something has to take its
rebuilding.
place.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that empty place is a dangerous place. It's very uncomfortable. I'm from Texas, so excuse this metaphor, but it's really easy to be warm and cozy in a big pile of cow manure, and not want to shake it off and get out. And that empty place where you've emptied, this pitcher of dirt out representing your life, and you want to replace it with clean, fresh water, that pitcher has to sit empty for a little while. And that's a raw, empty place to be. And that's the part where a lot of people get hung up, because you don't know you want to start filling yourself back up with familiar things, perhaps unhealthy things that you're used to experiencing, which is what I did in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. I relate to that. It is, even if you don't like it, you may not know that you don't like it. It's what you know. It's literally the thing that your brain has been trained to do.
Right.
So it's easy to do what you already know. The challenge is in trusting the process and learning something different.
Yeah. And so one of the other points that I make, once you realize that you need to make a change, you've got to start developing some goals and set some determinations, decide where do you want to go, some place that's different and better. And you may not know, to your point, what that is, because you haven't experienced anything else. And that's why it's so important to find some healthy influences in your life. People who can show you what different looks like, what better looks like. I had to surround myself with people that had lived a completely different life than what I had lived, so that I could get a vision for what normal really looked like. If I had been satisfied to stay and remain in my family situation, that is all I ever would have known. And I wouldn't have had any sort of benchmark or anything to compare it with. It was extremely uncomfortable. I felt like I was a fake for a large part of the years of my early life, because I was like a fish out of water. And that's where I had to start learning to tell myself that it's okay. I deserved to have a healthy, successful life. I deserve to have, money to spend. I deserve to have a successful career. I deserve to have a healthy marriage. And I just didn't know any different. And so I had to consciously go out and find those things to replace all of the icky stuff that had been there before.
That worthiness piece that you mentioned at the very top of the recording is that can be a very emotional journey for people. I remember in high school, I think I was talking to the guidance counselor, and they were complimenting me as a student, kind of just, giving me their perspective. And I cried. I couldn't take it. It took years before I could take a compliment, like a sincere compliment, not the whole like, oh, I love your shirt. But like when somebody would like sit down and look me in the eyes and tell me who they saw, I would literally sob. It was horrible. And I remember thinking, what in the heck is wrong with me? Like, just say thank you and move along. But that worthiness piece is a very powerful shift for women. And I'm suspecting that there's a lot of women listening to this that really don't have a handle on their own worth.
Yes. And I think that a lot of women, in an effort to remain humble, wind up forcing themselves mentally into low self-esteem or lack of confidence. And I would argue that, having a large ego and being full of yourself is completely, is prideful. But I would argue that having a defeated, less than, poverty-stricken sort of mentality is a form of pride also, because either way you're focused on yourself. And I think a lot of women think that they're being humble when they, say, oh, I don't deserve that, or I'm fine. I can do fine. I don't deserve that. I don't need that. I'll just do without, and or put themselves down and don't allow themselves to be complimented, such as what you said. And that's something that I'm trying to learn a little more about and explore, this concept that I have that either way, it's two sides of the pride coin. If you are focused on yourself in a arrogant, positive, an over the top positive way, or focused on yourself in a negative way, I think that focusing on yourself is pride. So anyway, that's something that I am a thought process that I'm exploring further right now. But so far, I think that it has some meat to it.
Oh, I think it absolutely does. And alongside that conversation is the idea of identity. How do we identify ourselves in the world that we live in?
Yeah. So, a popular phrase is, that not to let your past identify, don't be identified by your past, define you. Don't let your past define you. I think that our pasts really do define us, but separating whether we're going to be a victim of our past or we're going to use that story combined with some ambition, which I'm a big formula person, as you can tell, but I think our past experiences plus the ambition that we develop is going to equal, our future experiences and our future lives and our future success. So, I do think that your past defines who you are, but it's how you use it that determines how happy you're going to be, how much you're going to have to offer to others, and be able to be a good example of what's possible.
I like that. Your past defines who you are, but you get to decide how to use it.
Yes.
That's that step out of victimhood and into self-responsibility, right? Personal responsibility.
Yeah. So I was a victim of parental kidnapping. I was a missing child. I am not anymore, but I am still using that part of my life for good.
Just out of curiosity, what ended up happening when you refound your mother?
So it was a long process to healing. I had to learn what really happened, and I was very determined to do that. She was terrified as a mother. She didn't even know if we were alive or dead. So, and I just showed up, one day. But she needed to spend a lot of time making sure that I knew that she had never given up looking for us. And I really, at the time, wanted to just move on, and I didn't really want to talk about that part of it. She had her things she needed to talk about, and I had my things I needed to talk about. And plus, I was focused on the future more so at the time than the past. So we each had our things, and we butted heads really a lot at the beginning. You would think that it would be this wonderful, emotional, positive reunion, and that's what she was hoping for. But it was a struggle. It was just a struggle because we didn't know each other, and I didn't want anyone telling me what to do. And, so I did wind up living with her for a period of time, and we had our ups and downs. We really got our act together and our relationship together when I was about 27. I married a man who had 2 small children, and became, a mother to them. And when they came into my life, I realized how difficult it would be I wasn't even their biological mother, but I realized how difficult it would be to lose them in some way. And all these motherly feelings, started coming up, things that I hadn't experienced before. And I realized that I was about the same age that my mother was whenever my brother and I were abducted. So getting to that phase in life where I could identify and empathize with her, we really got over the hump at that point. And I was able to understand, I'll never understand what she went through. It was horrifying, and she's an incredibly strong woman. But I was able to really kind of open up and let her go through and tell me some of the things that she had been through, and help her accomplish some healing out of it as well. We're very close today. It's my brother had a very different path to recovery than what I did, and she went 21 years without seeing my brother. She went 9 years without seeing me, but she went 21 years without seeing my brother. But I was able to facilitate their reunion finally, but what I discovered through being reunited with my mother, and after we were truly connected as mother and daughter and really open with each other, no walls, the walls were down, we were trusting each other, I realized how much I'm actually like her. There were things that I had grown up with, being criticized by my dad for behavior or traits or thought processes. And I would try to force myself to change those things. And after I really got to know my mother, I realized where all those things came from. And I am a lot like her. So that was a sort of one of the last dots to get connected for me, was in this learning to accept myself for who I was exploring her past, her childhood, and understanding where some of the traits that I had I wasn't very accepting of, realizing that some of these things are just natural and they came from my mother, but I didn't grow up with her. So, I didn't know these things. So that was really enlightening and really, really good for me, and rewarding for her as well.
You mentioned identifying and empathizing with your mom. As we go through this process of healing ourselves and choosing a different path, I think those are 2 really important steps that may have to take place for people, especially if they have been mistreated by someone, and most of us have, right? Obviously, you went through something more dramatic, but not minimizing the journey that we've been on, and really, being willing to see it for what it is, right? That's kind of what you went through with your mom. You began to identify and empathize with her. And I think we need to do that with ourselves. We need to identify and empathize with ourselves and where we've been and what we've gone through, as well as maybe the people that were the offenders, which does not necessarily mean you stay in those unhealthy relationships, but we can at least better understand what caused the situation. Is that something that you went through with your father?
Yes. So I think that at some point in my healing, I realized that I may not know or be able to see everything or understand why things happened, but I did get to a point where I knew there was a bigger picture. There was always a bigger picture. I may not be able to see it, but there was a bigger picture here. And because I was really interested in my family story and what happened, I studied it so in depth and from more of a kind of a historian researcher perspective. And what I wanted to do was, not lament on my past, but it held so many clues as to what happened, why happened. And so I wanted to use it as a resource. So it's kind of become the force behind me, look into the future that's the, it's what created the momentum in my mind and my heart. But I did have to sort of get aligned with what happened and understand that I don't know everything, but there's a bigger picture here. And as time went on, what I was able to realize and discover about my father was that there was true mental illness involved, and I couldn't see it as a child. I didn't know what it looked like. I mean, in his own way, he was a loving father. But as I grew up, I realized that, and as I started to understand what mental illness was, I realized that he suffered from mental illness. So that was, while it didn't make everything okay, because I'm sitting here with a story and something that someone did to me that I will never get an apology for. And I had to learn to be okay with that. And that is a very difficult thing to do, but it's key if you want to move on with your life and no longer be a victim to your circumstances. You can move on and you can forgive despite the fact that you might not ever get an apology from the person who wronged you. And in my case, that is the absolute truth. I will never get that. So the mental illness side of things created, though, a feeling in me of, like I said, it wasn't okay. And it didn't make it okay that it happened, but I understood that he had circumstances in his childhood that he hadn't overcome. And I got to really understand through getting to know my mother what those things were and what sort of abuses he suffered as a child. And he chose to remain in a victim-like mentality for his entire life. And I think that that's a very, very sad thing. At this point in my life, I'm not angry any longer. I am not resentful. It actually pains my heart that, that he was not able to overcome what happened to him and his circumstances. And, it's just, it's heartbreaking when you see someone and they don't think that they can move beyond it. And it is easier to blame someone else. So for, my dad's life, he blamed his parents and he blamed his wife for every bad thing that had ever happened to him. So I just refused to let that mentality permanently settle into my psyche.
There's something to be said for those generational tendencies and habits. We do have some genetic tendencies, right? And then you also have the environmental tendencies that we need to become aware of, so that we can even begin to understand why we do the things that we do.
Yes. Generational bondage is a real thing. And that's why it was so, I didn't understand it then the way I understand it now, but I realized that it was very important for me to understand what had happened so that I could glean all of the information from it that I could. There's that term, bring beauty from the ashes. And I just refuse to let what happened in my family be in vain. I'm going to use it to affect other people's lives and be, the best possible version of myself that I can be. And that's, I don't think that we're given our stories just to sweep them under the rug and not use them. I think that we are given our stories to learn from them, get everything out of it that we're intended to get out of it, and then use that story after we've learned from it, use that story and our circumstances to share with other people in order to help them.
So as we come close to the end of our time together, what kind of gifts, 3 takeaways do you have for my tribe?
I think what I would like to let everyone know is, first of all, you can overcome your circumstances. You're smart enough. I think that you have to stop telling yourself you can't and allow yourself to be willing. Be willing to shift your thought process and be willing to take responsibility for your own life and to do the work necessary in order to create that, the life that you deserve to have.
And if you had someone in front of you who was really stuck, what would you want them to hear most?
Just simply that it is possible. It is possible to get unstuck. And again, it may not be your fault that you are where you are, but it is your fault if you allow yourself to remain where you are and remain in this set of circumstances. And now that your eyes have been open, and nothing is as painful as staying stuck somewhere that you don't belong.
So it may not be your fault what happened to you, but it is your fault if you stay stuck. That is a true tough love statement right there. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much, Kim, for being a part of my show today and for sharing your insight, your story, and your mission with us. I really appreciate that.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Awesome. Today I've been speaking with Kim Cobb. She's a business professional. She runs a private investment firm. She's the author of Stuck, A Way Out. And if you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 141, I will have links for you to connect with Kim so that you can find her book, learn more about her story. And today we really want you to take away the message that, things happen to all of us, but we get to choose what we do with it. So please take the time to share this message with your friends. Follow Feminine Roadmap, subscribe, share, rate it, get this message out there because someone needs to hear this. If it's not you, you know someone who does. Let's link arms, ladies. Let's share these messages that can change people's lives. Let's become the greater versions of ourselves every single day. And remember, you are worthy. Remember that. You are worthy. So have a wonderful week. We look forward to talking to you all again next time. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.